And our region was profoundly impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, and that's especially the case with the tourism sector. So, with the pandemic reaching the end of its third year in the summer of 2023, this study was undertaken. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the study details, the methodology, and then some of the results. But I do want to mention, first off, that this project was made possible through funding provided by the Atlantic Canada Agreement on Tourism, or ACAT. And ACAT, as many of you may know, is a 9-member pan-Atlantic initiative that includes Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency, or COA, the 4 Atlantic Canada Tourism Industry Associations, and also the 4 provincial departments responsible for tourism. So while we collected results overall with reference to the region, we also will have some very specific information related to PEI that I'll share with you as well. So on that note, I'd like to begin just by sharing a little bit of details with you on the methodology used for this study. We undertook an online survey, and the audience for this study included travelers from the Mid-Atlantic and also from the New England regions of the United States. And just for clarity, when I'm saying Mid-Atlantic, I'm meaning New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. And New England includes 6 broad regions, namely Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Connecticut, Vermont, and Rhode Island. So again, that was the primary audience for this study. We had over 2,400 completes, so 2,402 travelers, and it was broken down evenly with 1,200 from the Mid-Atlantic region and 1,202 from New England. This, as I mentioned, was something that happened at the end of last summer. So the data collection dates were actually the end of July to the 1st of August. And on average, the survey took 22 minutes to complete. There were many different objectives, more than 10 detailed objectives of the study. But broadly speaking, the 3 key objectives were to understand the factors that impact the way Americans travel. We also wanted to get an insight on how those factors may continue to impact travel intentions. So what are their travel intentions and their behaviors and their destination choices over the short term looking forward? And we also wanted to assess visitor market potential from each of those 2 regions. And importantly, as part of that, we explored the appeal of various destinations, and we collected reactions to advertisements for each of the Atlantic provinces. So today, I'll be sharing with you details of the reactions for the Prince Edward Island tourism ads, given that that's especially relevant for you. There are a few pre-qualifiers for those completing the survey that are important to keep in mind. And to qualify, everyone had to have a valid passport, so they had to at least have the ability to travel to Canada and potentially to PEI. They must have taken at least one vacation trip that was at least 2 nights long outside of their home state during the past 3 years. And of that, there had to have been at least 1 night spent in paid accommodation. Or if they hadn't done that, they must have some definite plans to take such a trip over the next year. We didn't have any quotas put in place for age, for gender, or within the region, or where they had to have visited or anything like that. So this is really looking at people who have taken vacation in that regard or plan to. So I'm going to start by sharing with you some details on travel activities. After that, I'll be talking to you about what they shared with us what factors they consider when they're choosing a destination. And also we'll talk about their travel intentions going forward. We'll also explore travel planning and behaviors. And then I'll share some of the reactions that they told us to the PEI travel advertising. So let's start by thinking about travel activities. Keep in mind the screening criteria. What we saw is that nearly all U.S. visitors surveyed have taken a recent out-of-state vacation. 94% told us that they've taken an out-of-state vacation trip in the past 3 years. And on average, we see that they would have taken 4 to 5 trips. Not surprisingly, as household income goes up, folks are more likely to have taken an increased number of visitors or an increased number of trips. Also, an important consideration is we see when we asked where they've traveled, we see that the top destinations mirror the fact that domestic travel is what's most common for U.S. travelers. So they like to most often visit within their home country. You can see here 3/4 say that the top destinations that they traveled to in recent years was within the United States. And when you look within the US, where it is they're visiting, the most often or frequently mentioned destination included Florida, followed by New York, and then you can see Maine, California, New Hampshire, New Jersey, and Massachusetts. So those were the top destinations that were mentioned.
Older travelers were more likely to do the domestic as well.
Yeah. So again, age is influenced by where they would like to go. And within even those two markets of studies, we see that within the New England marketplace, New York was especially high as well. So when you look at those top destinations where they've traveled, you can see here that close to 3 in 10 say that the top destinations they visited is the Caribbean or Bermuda, 1/4 Canada, 2 in 10 Europe, and 14% Mexico. Let's have a look at those Canadian visitors. So as you can see here, 1/4 of U.S. travelers told us that they have visited Canada in the past 3 years. Of those, the most popular destinations are Ontario and Quebec. However, it's important to note that a notable percentage did visit Atlantic Canada. And when we look at the percent that actually visited the Atlantic region, 13% told us they visited New Brunswick, a similar percent said Nova Scotia, 9% PEI, and 7% Newfoundland and Labrador. And even within the PEI visitors, it's important to note here that there is a slight difference between which region they're from. So those in New England, or from New England rather, they were slightly more likely to have visited PEI. So 11% of those who had visited PEI were from New England versus 7% of those from Mid-Atlantic visited PEI. Another important consideration here is when we asked what portion had ever visited Atlantic Canada, you'll see that percentage is slightly higher than those who have visited just within the recent years. So we wanted to find out if you have not visited, or have you ever? So again, 20% told us that they have visited PEI ever. And that's Nova Scotia was the most mentioned province that they have ever visited, followed by New Brunswick and then PEI. And that's consistent. That 20% is actually consistent regardless of whether it's visitors from Mid-Atlantic or New England. Also, of note, among non-visitors, a significant proportion had heard of each of those Atlantic provinces, and it varies depending on which province we're speaking of. We were interested in understanding how familiar they are with Canadian provinces and territories. And we asked, when it comes to knowing what each province has to offer, namely what is to see there and what is to do there when you're on vacation, um, do you know? And here, interestingly, you see that familiarity or level of familiarity is highest in Quebec and Ontario, where about 3/4 have said that they have an idea of what there is to see and do there while on vacation. And you can see that's followed by Nova Scotia when you look at the region at 64%, but 6 in 10 mentioned that they know what there is to see and do while on vacation, considering PEI. And we wanted to explore awareness and familiarity overall. And when looking at the US travelers market overall, what this shows is that awareness and familiarity is strongest for Ontario and Quebec, which is not surprising given that is where they indicated most likely they had traveled if they had visited Canada. The bulk of US travelers, though, are aware of each Atlantic Canadian province. And once again, there we see awareness and familiarity is highest for Nova Scotia. But when you look at PEI, the results are quite good. So 59% or 6 in 10 said they're aware of PEI, and 34% or 1/3 said they are familiar with the province.
New England residents tend to be more familiar as well.
So, and that will be something that you'll hear a little bit as we walk through the presentation. That New England proximity seems to make a difference. So, those who are closer to Atlantic Canada, namely those in New England, tend to be more familiar and more aware of each of the Atlantic provinces, and that's certainly the case for PEI as well. We asked those who are somewhat or are very familiar with PEI, what would they expect if they visited PEI? And this is interesting because what we saw is that the oceanfront is top of mind as a key expectation. Sightseeing and nature were other key expectations. And we've got some verbatim comments here that just add some color commentary to what their perceptions were. Key expectations of PEI: eat lots of PEI mussels, sightseeing boats, shops. You'd expect to see a nice beach with some nice views and nature scenery, and with some nice shops and restaurants to visit. Ferries, ocean activities, seafood, visit farms and fishing villages, fishing, local crafts and artisans. Enjoy the ocean views and spend family time in a nice cabin. Enjoy, oh, that's a double one, sorry. Visit antique historic sites and buildings, hike. Visit sites relating to the famous book, Anne of Green Gables. Visit estate sales, antique shops, yard sales, and flea markets. Patronize small, quirky local restaurants for offbeat food. See what the locals do. So again, it really speaks to those general expectations related to the water, for sure, sightseeing, and a lot of experiencing the local culture. Now, we presented a series of 25 different items to all survey respondents and asked them, when they're selecting a destination, how important are each of these factors when they're selecting a destination? And we saw that a wide range were certainly very important when choosing a vacation destination, but safety was one of the factors that was deemed most critical. Of all of those 25 different items, there were 10 factors that were deemed most critically important when choosing a pleasure destination. First off, and you can see that safety is quite top of mind there. 80% considered um, being a safe place to visit, something that is critically important for them when choosing a pleasure vacation destination. That's followed by, is a place that I can enjoy when I travel with friends and families, and is a place that allows me to de-stress. 6 and 10 also mention it's critically important for them that it be a place with a lot of great things to see and do, and something that offers good value for money. The bottom top 10 factors. Again, these are all factors that were considered critically important. 58% has beautiful outdoor scenery and landscapes, has people that are friendly and welcoming, has great local dining and culinary experiences, is a great place for exploring and soaking in the atmosphere, and is a place that offers a real, authentic experience. So again, of 25 different factors, these were factors that were deemed the top 10 in terms of being most critically important. Items that were less likely to be on that top 10 are things like having abundant nightlife available. So you can see it's safety most first and foremost, followed by a place where they can go and experience things and really experience the culture and the people and the food. We asked them, as I mentioned, we did share with them advertisements for the area for PEI, but before we did so, we asked them when they're thinking about intentions to visit across 4 major markets, where would they prefer to go? And those 4 markets included United States, Europe, Canada, and Mexico. And just a lot of information is in this graph. So just to put it in context here, we wondered whether or not they're intending to visit each of these 4 destinations in the next 2 years. The gray areas means no interest, or that it's just not at all top of mind. Orange is good. That means they're dreaming about visiting or returning, or seriously considering visiting or returning. The blue means actually that they're moving towards making travel plans. So they've either started gathering information, they're planning an itinerary, they're currently making arrangements, or they've already booked it. So a couple of things that I would point out here is obviously, once again, we see that these findings highlight that they have a preference for domestic travel. They like to stay local. 47% are actively planning a trip within the United States. However, when we look at Europe, you see almost a quarter here are actually actively planning a trip to Europe. And similarly, 2 and 10 are currently in the planning stages of making a trip to Canada. Mexico, of those 4, are the least likely destination that they're looking at.
When it comes to Canada as well, older travelers are much more likely to indicate that they're seriously considering visiting or returning to Canada.
Um, and that's importantly here for Canada is that 2 and 10, and only 2 and 10, really don't have Canada as a destination they would consider. So that just suggests that they are certainly open to it as a destination. Then what we wanted to do is ask those who have either already booked or plan to book within the next few years, to tell us a little bit about the intentions. So when we look at Canada specifically, this is where the comment, you saw the summary on the previous slide, only 2 and 10 have no interest or haven't thought of visiting Canada. But there's certainly 1/2 of travelers who have already booked or plan to book a trip in the US. And even though they're less likely to consider Canada as a destination, there is some planning there within the next 2 years. When you look at all of those who are open to a Canada visit, we broke it down by the percent who are likely to visit each Atlantic Canada province. And those again are all the blues there, as we asked them which destination specifically. And what you see here is that across Atlantic Canada, Nova Scotia is top of mind, but PEI follows that. 14% indicated that they're likely to visit PEI. Now, a clear majority of US travelers are likely to consider Atlantic Canada over the next 2 years. In fact, we saw that 63% of US travelers told us they have some likelihood of considering traveling to at least one Atlantic Canada province in the next 2 years. This is interesting. I mean, you can see 15% told us they'll likely go to one province, 17% said they'd go to two, 13% to three, and 19% said they'll likely go to all four, which may be a little reflective of a lack of familiarity in terms of being able to go for a week and see all of the four provinces. Lynn, are there any further differences there that might warrant some mention?
No, I think I think it was New England was slightly more likely than those living in the Mid-Atlantic to consider at least one Atlantic province in the near future. So it was like 66% versus 60% when you look at those differences.
Again, highlighting that proximity seems to make a difference. So those living in the region closest to Atlantic Canada are more likely to indicate that they'll travel.
And also, those that have visited Atlantic Canada in the past and those with children were also more likely to express consideration to visiting at least one province in the near future.
So again, past visitation there seems to make a difference too, and influencing their likelihood to visit. When we consider future travel intentions, we wanted to understand, especially post-pandemic, where their future travel intentions compare or how they might compare. We wanted to understand whether they're taking more trips, taking the same number of trips, taking fewer trips, or if they've never taken these type of trips. When you look at again, short trips of 1 to 2 nights, longer trips, trips within their state, trips outside their state, but within US, trips to Canada, or trips beyond the US and Canada. And what we see here is while the bulk of US travelers anticipate that the number of vacation trips they're going to take in the coming year will be the same or higher than the previous year, it appears that Canadian travel will remain relatively stable. So you can see here, in terms of taking the same number of trips, we've got 34% that would be the case. 21% are going to take more trips though. So more than half said they will take more or the same.
And perhaps unsurprising, like the higher income individuals are also more likely to indicate that they would take more trips when it comes to Canada.
And we also asked, assuming you had a choice of visiting either Atlantic Canada, Mid-Atlantic, or New England, but you could only choose one, which would you choose? And this is interesting. We see overall that Atlantic Canada and New England are equally preferred regional destinations. So you can see here, 36% said if they, again, had to choose one, they would choose Atlantic Canada. 37% said they would choose New England, and only 18% said that of those three, they would choose the Mid-Atlantic. And when we asked those who mention the 36% who said I would choose Atlantic Canada, we wanted to understand why Atlantic Canada is preferred. And what we were told is, I've heard good things. I want to visit there. It's a more interesting region. I've never been. I want to go somewhere new, far away from home. And the others are more familiar to me. So that was what the most prominent reason given was for why Atlantic Canada was preferred. To a lesser extent, we heard the scenery, nature, wildlife, or I like the area. I enjoyed previous trips. So definitely a key draw for those who would prefer to go to Atlantic Canada of those three regions is the fact that it's something new, someplace they haven't been before, and they'd like something a little different. Um, One of the things that we wanted to consider here is what is the overall market potential for PEI across both of these markets. So when we look at the results, the percent who had actually visited within the past 3 years, the plan to visit in the next 2 years, and whether or not they'd consider it in the future, you can see here that there is notable market potential for PEI visitation across both markets. This takes the US Census figures and key responses to certain answers here to give you what the potential is, appreciating that this is likely quite optimistic in terms of response, but this would suggest that if you extrapolate it to the total population, based on the percent that told us they visited in the past 3 years, there's a potential here of considerable visitation. And it also suggests to us that the likelihood, because the population would be less in the New England area, those in New England may have a higher likelihood to visit, but obviously the potential would be less because the population is less. Let's talk about travel planning. And we wanted to know more about their planning cycle. And what we heard is that the preferred months for traveling is June, July, August, and September. And that's regardless of which market it was. And we also, when we wanted to explore their planning cycle, we see that for the most part, uh, the average number of months to plan or research or book a trip is 4.6 months to plan and roughly 4 months to book a trip. So that just gives you an idea on the window in terms of booking. So visitors expect the planning cycle to last several months. And an important point here is that results are very consistent regardless of which Atlantic province they're considering visiting. So whether it's New Brunswick, Newfoundland and Labrador, Nova Scotia, or PEI, the months are consistent, as is the planning cycle, the period of time to book. So again, for planning and researching a trip, typically 4 to 5 months. For booking, typically 3 to 4 months. When we're looking at travel planning, it was also important to understand where are they getting their information about Atlantic Canada. And the top 5 information sources for Atlantic Canada, first and foremost, was travel websites. And that includes Expedia, Travelocity, or others. So travel websites are key. Online review sites are also really important. So those are the two most important or key sources for information when travelers are considering an Atlantic Canada vacation. That follows by destination websites, namely going to the province site, social media, and advice from family and friends or word of mouth. Importantly, this isn't broken down by province because results are incredibly similar. They mirror each other regardless of which province they're looking at. So these remain the five key information sources when people are looking for information or considering booking an Atlantic Canada vacation. And Lynn, were there any notable differences there across the two markets, whether people are in New England or whether they are in the other Mid-Atlantic or New England?
No, nothing too major though. Although those living in Mid-Atlantic report using AAA or CAA as information sources much more often, so 22% versus 12%. So that's kind of interesting. And also, you know, users of non-online information sources. So looking at, word of mouth, travel guidebooks, those things that increases with age. So younger people are much more likely to kind of rely on the social media, while older travelers are much more likely to kind of use the traditional word of mouth and non-online sources.
Very good. Another important consideration when you're thinking about travel planning is how do they get here? And what we see when we ask them how they would expect to get here, air travel is the most common anticipated mode of transportation to Atlantic Canada for vacation. And this is regardless of whether they're from the Mid-Atlantic or from New England. So again, among those who told us they're likely to consider travel to Atlantic Canada, we asked them, how would you get there? And you can see, look at the figures in PEI, 51% of those in New England mentioned air, Mid-Atlantic, 63%. Car, contrary to that, you can see that only a minority mentioned by car. So this is surprising to me, given particularly the New England, the closer proximity, but it's also reflective of the fact that people want to be able to get where they're going and spend time there rather than traveling to get there.
New England travelers are also notably more likely to say ferry, using that, especially when it comes to PEI.
Yeah. You can see that big difference there, 8% Mid-Atlantic versus 18% New England. And you also see that New England folks are certainly more likely than those in the Mid-Atlantic to say that they are going to drive. So 1/3 of those would travel by car. But again, it's surprising that air is the top of mind mention. There is, however, 1 in 10 who don't know at this time. Regardless of which province they intend to visit, though, the majority of US travelers told us they'd use a travel agent or a tour operator to assist with their planning. So we saw that between 55% and 59%, depending on the province, those who are visiting Atlantic Canada in the next 2 years, they would use a travel agent or a tour operator to guide or assist in their planning, which certainly speaks to the fact that they may not be overly familiar with the destination, so they're looking for assistance. And those who indicated they would use a travel agent or tour operator, we asked them which services they'd likely use. And you can see the top of mention is booking air transportation, followed by asking for recommendations of what to do when they got there, or booking accommodations. And 4 in 10 said booking a complete package, including transportation, accommodation, meals. To a lesser extent, they're looking to a tour operator to help book car rentals, cruise, or book ferries or motor coach. But clearly, it's primarily air transportation and recommendations of what to do when you get there. So we've talked about their travel intentions as well as travel planning. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about ad recall and evaluation. And We asked whether or not they recall seeing tourism-related ads by each destination. And we see that exposure to Atlantic Canada advertising is strong, and US travelers are exposed through a variety of advertising means. In the Mid-Atlantic, you can see PEI, 46% said they recall tourism-related ads. And for Atlantic Canada overall, it was 56%. In the New England market, 48%, so about half, mentioned Atlantic Canada overall, versus 40% in PEI. And the top medium for hearing or recalling those ads, it was really mixed. TV, social media, and general online. And this really highlights the importance of any media campaign continuing to have multi-modes. So not being completely reliant on just one medium. So let's look at reactions to the PEI app. And we shared the video and static imageries of some imagery of some recent ads. And what we saw, and after they saw the video and saw the ads, we asked for the reactions. And we saw that the PEI ads, they hold wide appeal and they're considered motivating. So 77% after they reviewed the ads considered them to be appealing. And importantly, 2/3 said that the ads motivate them to travel to PEI. The PEI ads generally leave the impression that they'll feel lighter when they're visiting. So we asked to what extent they agree with a variety of statements, whether this shows that the province includes things of interest to them, tells them that when they'll visit, they'll feel lighter, whether it makes them want to find out more about PEI, or whether it tells them to come find your island. So again, you can see very positive scores in this regard. 70% considered it to show things that are of interest to them. And similarly, would leave the impression that they're lighter when they visit there. The advertising positively influences travel intentions to PEI. In fact, after seeing the ads, we asked them, how likely is it that you take a pleasure trip to PEI after seeing these ads? And 50% told us that they would. That compares to a 14% likelihood of visitation that they shared with us before they saw the ads. So seeing the ads clearly positively influences their travel intentions. It speaks to them and encourages them to consider PEI as a destination to visit. And overall, we see that the ad exposure positively impacts likelihood to visit Atlantic Canada. So after seeing the ads for all 4 provinces, 68% of US travelers told us that they have some likelihood to travel to at least one Atlantic province in the next 2 years. And that was versus 63% who had some likelihood pre-ad. So again, it positively increased those travel intentions. And again, 14% said 1 province, 18% said 2, 12, 3, and 24% all 4. So when you consider their travel intentions, their travel behaviors, and the reactions to the advertisement, there are a number of points I think that are really important to mention following this study. First off, we see that US travelers are open to a wide variety of destination choices, and Atlantic Canada holds appeal to many. We can see that clearly they have a preference to stay local and stay domestic, but there is interest in going outside. We also clearly see that proximity plays a key role in destination choice. The closer they are to Canada, that Canada border, the increased likelihood they have of visiting. So those in New England market are more likely than those in the Mid-Atlantic to visit Atlantic Canada and PEI specifically. And we also saw that past experience in Atlantic Canada clearly impacts travel intentions. So those who have visited PEI and Atlantic Canada are more likely to express travel intentions to the region within the next 2 years. However, as I mentioned, I mean, they're open to a wide variety of destinations. That means that we face tough competition when we're looking at the US market. We also know that they are slightly predisposed, if they're thinking Canada, to think Ontario and Quebec. So Atlantic Canada needs to clearly position itself, as does any Atlantic province, clearly position itself as offering something that differentiates it from other destinations. Future campaign efforts, given that planning cycle that we talked about, the results suggest they should focus on media buys in the early winter and the spring months. So that 3 to 4 month window for planning is something that's really important in terms of making sure you're top of mind before they've actually started planning their vacation. And we talked about facing tough competition, but differentiation is key in encouraging US travelers to select an Atlantic Canadian pleasure trip over other destination choices. We know safety is very important and something that can't be ignored, but also affordability is something that's top of mind. And this is where certainly the Canadian dollar has a benefit in our favor in that regard. So important to really focus on differentiation in terms of the experiences, because they're looking for that authentic experience and different culture, someplace that is different from home. And it's important that that be considered and highlighted. The other point here, and the final point really that's a consideration, is that an air travel access solution is clearly needed to meet the US travelers' needs. We see how important they perceive air travel to be in choosing Atlantic Canada as a destination. And currently, since the pandemic, certainly air access has been a little problematic in our region, both intra-provincially and directly to the region from outside. So we need to have an air travel access solution to meet those US travelers' needs. And that's it. So that I've shared a lot of information there, but both Lynn and I would certainly be happy to answer any questions that you may have. And if you can ask us, you can ask through the chat or you can raise a hand. Rose.
There was one question earlier too about do we have any breakdown which online review sites are being used? We did not capture that as part of the research, so we just asked them if that was one of the avenues that they were using, but we didn't get them to specify exactly which sites they're using.
Rose, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. That was actually one of my questions. So the only other question I have is, will this deck be available for us post this presentation, just so that we can continue to use it and refer to it?
Most certainly.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Good
And
presentation.
I'll make sure, Colleen, that that's sent to you for distribution. The age breakdown of respondents. Importantly, we did not set quotas for visitation for survey respondents. So but we do have a full breakdown, and that would be in the detailed report of the respondents by different age category. Lynn, I don't know if you're able to easily access that as well.
Just try to pull that up.
And I see another question. What's the percentage visiting Ontario in and Quebec in comparison to Atlantic Canada? And I will go back to that slide in the presentation. Lynn, were you able to provide any breakdown on the age groups?
Yeah, just give me 1 second.
Any other comments or questions while we pull that up?
Judy McDonald, I just wanted to say that, for instance, last year we had an older clientele from the US, more so than other years. And I think that has to do with affordability, like people have the resources to travel. But I would say that we don't have I don't know exactly, because we don't have the booking system to tell us the percentages anymore, but I have often had as many US as I've had Canadians, and sometimes more, like up to 50% US visitors here. And we've been in business 40 years, and we have a large US, and they come from all over. They don't just come from New England and the Mid-Atlantic. A lot come from Florida, Tennessee. A lot of them are Anna Green Gables fans. I do I do a Discovering Green Gables, so they come from everywhere for that. And so I have and of course my biggest Canadian are Quebec and Ontario.
Very good. And this study specifically was just focusing on the US market in those two regions
Yeah.
to understand their behaviors. One comment I will make, though, in terms of you mentioned that the bulk of visitors that you've seen are older. And I want to mention this in terms of mode of travel. We do know that older visitors or travelers are more inclined to travel by car rather than by air. The
Right.
younger visitors in particular, they are more interested in traveling by air.
Yes.
As far as our age breakdown, we had for the 18 to 34 age group, we had 38%. For 35 to 54%, sorry, 35 to 54-year-olds, we had 35%, and the 55 to 75, we had 28% of respondents.
Right.
So without quotas being established, we did have quite a mix of different age groups.
Yeah.
Mm.
And if Lynn, if you could also look for that last question in terms of the percent of those who visited Ontario and Quebec.
Okay.
And Luke, I see you've raised your hand as well.
Thank you, Margaret, for the presentation. And forgive me, I did join about 20 minutes late, so there's a chance this was covered. I'm curious, though, as to, with the strong position of the US dollar for them to travel to Canada, is there an awareness among the Americans that you hold as to that value for them?
Mhm. We did not ask specifically about the current exchange rate. So I think, Luke, it may be fair to say that, and this is based on other research that I've done with Americans, unless they have traveled to Canada, they may not be aware of the extent of the exchange rate. But we did not ask about that specifically. All we do know is that affordability is something that is important to them in considering their
Thanks.
destination.
So as far as going back to the question about visitation, so the ones that have visited Canada, we're seeing for Ontario and Quebec, we had 52% Mid-Atlantic for Ontario, 33% for New England, and then for Quebec, 33% Mid-Atlantic, and then 43% New England.
Very good. Any other questions? Dongku.
Yes, this is Donggu from Tourism PI. Anyway, first of all, thank you very much for really big information. I have based on the result, I have I can see three little bit surprising results. First is about travel information based on our many years research. Your result is travel website #1 travel information, but based on our 20 years research, already destination official website is #1. And then travel websites like Travelocity or Expedia kind of maybe later. This is one of the surprising. And then also I understand usually American people to use of air when they travel, but as we all know, practically it's not easy to access the air, specifically PEI, because more expensive. Maybe American expected affordable or cheap flights, but very expensive. That is very also surprising. Third is about the travel agent. My understanding is this result is, yes, U.S. potential travelers would like to use travel agent to book something. So maybe travel agent include offline, online, both, I think. Not offline travel agent, online travel agent include, I think. That's my understanding. Yes, okay.
You're correct. You're correct.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
That makes sense. And then lastly, I'd like to mention, even though Judy already mentioned about the U.S. market in PI, statistically, historically, and then #1 U.S. regional market is New England. But I think even though you mentioned in the last page, geographical proximity is very important. But at least for PI, and then rising or bigger market is South Atlantic. I think I'm not talking about this research, right? PI or Atlantic Canada should consider when we have in the next future U.S. market study, include South Atlantic market is second largest U.S. regional market. So, I mean, interesting. I know in some years, PI more advertisement in New York and in Mid-Atlantic, but one of research says, interesting, right? Urban travelers are more likely to travel to urban area. Rural potential travelers more likely to travel to rural area. Islanders love to travel to island. That's very interesting. Even though a huge potential market for Atlantic America, but I think next time should consider South Atlantic market study. That's it.
Yeah, no, very good. Thank you for those comments. And this was a study that the U.S. consumer study has been something, this market in particular, that has been researched, I believe, in 2018 as well. So this was specifically looking at one market, but you're so correct in that there are so many other important markets as well.
Yes, as far as I know, the ECOA or ACAT have been researched for 2 regional market studies in the past long time, right? I think it's time to update or extend it. That's what I wanted to say.
Oh, very good. Thank you. A couple of questions that have been raised in the chat. Jackie, we did not know how they traveled in the past, so we didn't ask that specifically on the survey. We were looking at their travel intentions in the future. And Alexander, yes, the presentation will be available. So we'll be sending that along. Any other points of clarity or comments or surprises? No? Okay. On that note, Colleen, shall I turn it back to you?
Sure. Actually, I just wanted to thank everyone for their participation this morning, and to confirm again that the deck and this presentation that was recorded will be posted to the ACAT website, and I put a link to that webpage in the chat. So if you'll give us a bit of time to just do that posting after this presentation is complete, and then you'll be able to access the files from there. Thanks, everyone.
Excellent. Thank you.
Bye
Great,
now.
thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.